There once was a man who could not hide his fear. He wore a mask that transformed his cowardice to rage. In turn, the man transformed into a monster. All that remained was a devouring fury that stalked the night, collecting the fearful faces of others. Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to be fighting the Butcher. The Butcher is notoriously difficult and tends to end people's campaigns when they're new to the game, so this should be an interesting fight, and hopefully this will be educational if you haven't fought him yet. In this campaign, which you've seen a little bit of earlier on in our first lion fight, we've had some pretty major trouble with resources. Everything that you see in front of you on these gear grids here is everything that we've been able to make using every single resource that we had in the settlement. We did also innovate in a lantern, which means that we can use the surge survival action. That means that we can spend a survival to gain an extra activation that we can use for attacking the monster or using one of our utility items. So we only have 8 survivors after some really terrible hunts, and this fight against the Butcher is probably going to make or break our campaign, so I really hope we can beat him, but whatever happens, I will capture it in this video. So in this fight, we're going to be using 4 basically new survivors, and apart from the stats that they gain from Survival of the Fittest, they don't have any Hunt XP or weapon proficiencies or anything like that. So we have Emir, Susie, Samantha, and Kaede. Kaede is going to be using Fecal Salve in order to not be a threat. And because with Fecal Salve you remain not a threat until you attack, she'll be able to use Cat Eye Circlet to reveal hit locations and manipulate the hit location deck, and bandage people when they start to bleed too much. Thanks to Stone Noses and Fecal Salve, she'll be at maximum survival, which for us is 2. And Emir is going to have bandages and bone darts, as well as some Stone Noses, so he'll be staying at range, bandaging if necessary, and hopefully encouraging other survivors with his survival. I'm going to be controlling these 2 survivors. Samantha and Susie will be controlled by my friend Bo. And both of her survivors have full rawhide armor, which means they might be able to avoid spending survival, and it also gives them an extra evasion, and in the case of Susie, an extra point of evasion from monster grease as well, so she'll be mainly tanking. In terms of weapons, we've got 1 Lion Beast Katar, and a bone axe, which I don't think is normally a good choice of weapon to create, but because we had tons of organs and hardly any bones, we went with it because it was slightly stronger than the bone blade. Everyone should have the maximum survival for our settlement of 2 for this fight, because of various items that we've brought and the 1 survival from naming them. And both Emir and Kaede get 1 insanity from Stone Noses. In terms of the hunt setup, we've deployed in this corner over here, which I'm not sure if is a good strategy or not, but it should prevent us from getting attacked on the first turn and give us a turn to collect these 2 acanthus plants, which could come in very handy if we successfully harvest them. The Butcher has 12 cards in his AI deck and 15 hit location cards, with a relatively slow movement of 5, but a high toughness at this point in our campaign of 9. And he tends to do lots of bleeds and brain damage. He also might be the first monster you've fought that has special traits, including Berserker, which means he draws 2 AI cards every turn instead of 1. He reshuffles his hit location deck at the start of every one of his turns, and he gets stronger for every survivor he manages to kill. He also gives every survivor the Infectious Lunacy survivor status, which means that if they get too much brain damage, they'll eventually suffer Frenzy, which speeds them up and makes them stronger, but prevents them from spending survival. So we'll be trying to spend survival as quickly as possible and make the best use of it before we become unable to use it. We got quite lucky with the 1 random terrain card for this fight and got acanthus plants, which might give us fresh acanthus. And we also had 3 stone columns as part of the regular setup of the fight, which probably won't be very relevant. The Butcher is always set up in this formation and only has 1 random terrain card. So because this is the first Nemesis encounter of a campaign, we don't have to go on a hunt, and instead we just fight the monster right outside the settlement, and it also means that we get the first turn. If we manage to beat him, we might be able to get some axe proficiency, and if we're really lucky, get his special cleavers. On turn 1, we'll see whether our strategy of hiding in this corner will pay off, with Samantha and Susie harvesting the 2 acanthus plants, and hopefully getting some fresh acanthus that will help them soak some more hits. Kaede taking the first brain damage if the Butcher does anything that causes brain damage, which he might because we're so far away that he might end up using his Menace ability, and Emir doing nothing on the first turn. So let's start by rolling for these 2 acanthus plants. So straight out the gate, Susie rolled a 1, meaning that she suffers 1 arm damage from the terrain, and that acanthus plant goes away. Samantha was luckier and didn't take any arm damage, but unfortunately didn't roll enough to get the fresh acanthus. For the first turn, Kaede and Emir won't do anything. Kaede's Cat Eye Circlet isn't useful this turn because the Butcher will reshuffle his hit locations at the start of his turn. So it's the first monster turn, so the Butcher will shuffle his hit locations deck and draw the first AI card of 2. Hack. So Hack targets the closest threat facing, which is going to be Kaede. Since Kaede is the monster controller at the start of the game, she gains 1 insanity. And he'll move his 5 movement and then try and attack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But since he's obviously out of range, he won't be able to do anything else. For his second AI card, he's going to take us to Hack City. So once again, the monster's going to move 5 spaces closer, but won't be able to attack because he's out of range. So Hack City is an interesting card because even though we're out of range and so we don't end up taking any after damage trigger and getting any of this special effect of Hack City where he continues hitting you until all of his attacks miss, the legendary lungs portion of the card down here after this flow icon still happens because there's nothing saying that he needs to be in range or to have made any of these hits for it to happen. So here it is. Legendary Lungs. The sensation of the Butcher's attack is similar to drowning. Desperately, you gasp for air only to be met with a mouthful of steel. The monster's attacks rain down on you, each blow faster than the last. Despite the attack only lasting a moment, things seem to slow down. You feel numb and isolated as if trapped in an endless body of water. There's no hope of escape, just the pressure from above on your gasping lungs. As the pounding in your chest intensifies, you recall the even rhythm of the monster's heaving chest. There is a chance you will learn something. So we're going to roll 1d10 on this learn table. 3. You feel as if on the cusp of realizing something big. It teases your mind before vanishing. Gain 3 survival. Unfortunately, we can't gain 3 survival because we're already at the max, but that's still fine. Kaede was the monster controller this turn, and because she was targeted twice, she gained 2 insanity, going up to 3. So we survived that whole turn, only gaining 2 insanity, which is a pretty good result. Okay, so now it's our first turn. The plan is for Kaede to use her Cat Eye Circlet in order to see what his hit locations are going to be before Emir and Samantha attack, and Susie, who's still out of range, will use her Rawhide Headband to see the top 2 AI cards and see if there's one that we particularly want to get rid of. So starting with Kaede, let's use the Cat Eye Circlet. So I'll press the 3 key to pick up the top 3 hit locations on the Butcher's deck. So we have 3 hit locations here. The Thick Cape, which has a reflex that could potentially cause 1 brain damage to us. Another reflex which requires high courage to avoid brain damage and being knocked down. And a difficult to wound breastplate location with +2 toughness, meaning that we need to roll 2 higher in order to wound it. But also the Lantern Explosion, where if you roll a Lantern 10, your attack causes an explosion that blinds you and removes a miniature from dreaded trophies. Okay, so after conferring with Boar, we've decided to put this one on top and use the ranged attack from Emir to try and hit it, and then put these next 2 afterwards for our axe user Samantha to hit. After using the Cat Eye Circlet, Kaede is going to run away around the Butcher, and Susie used her Rawhide Headband to look at the next 2 cards in the AI deck. After looking at the 2 cards, we decided that Devour Lantern would be really bad, so we've put it on top of the AI deck in the hopes that we can remove it with our next couple of attacks. And then Susie moved to get a bit closer to the Butcher to tank some hits in the future. Next up, Emir will throw his Bone Darts, first moving to avoid the Butcher as much as possible. Unfortunately, he rolled a 2, missing the Butcher completely. Samantha moved in front of the Butcher and tried to hit with her axe. She got 1 perfect hit and 1 miss using her Bone Axe, which even after adding 3 strength from the axe and 1 strength from her own character sheet isn't enough to wound the monster. Because she has less than 3 courage, she suffers 1 brain damage and is knocked down. We decided to use Susie's survival to encourage Samantha up and try again since we really want to get rid of Lantern Frenzy. Because of Rawhide Armor, sometimes you can get these survival actions for free, but because Boar only rolled a 2, it wasn't for free this time. Samantha also spent a survival, this time getting it for free with Rawhide, to swing again with the axe, getting another 1 hit. She scored 11 after adding her strength and her weapon, just enough to wound the Furious Breastplate. That means that we got rid of Lantern Frenzy, which would have been a really big problem for us. Now it's the monster's turn again, and the monster controller tile moves over to Samantha. We knew that the first monster attack this turn would be Hugh because we saw it last turn with Rawhide Headband. And because Hugh targets the closest threat facing, which is Samantha, who's the monster controller, she gains an insanity. And she takes a speed 1, accuracy 3+ attack. Because of her +1 evasion from Rawhide Vest and her +1 evasion from Survival of the Fittest, the monster's going to be hitting on a 5. Since it's a big hit that does a lot of damage and a bleed token and knocks you over, we decided to survival it, but unfortunately it wasn't for free with Rawhide Armor. Still, we didn't take any damage, which is good, and then the second attack of his turn is Wild Carve. This is again closest threat facing, and this time it's an accuracy 4+, becoming 6+ with the evasion that Samantha has. She gains another 1 insanity from being targeted in the targeting table, and since this is a speed 2 attack, we'll roll 2 dice. Unfortunately, he got 2 hits, so we'll take 2 1-damage hits to the waist and arms, as well as a bleeding token. Since Samantha's also adjacent to the monster, this last flow on the card causes her to suffer 1 more damage and gain 1 more bleeding token. We remembered at this point that because Samantha had taken a brain damage, she had to take 1 infectious lunacy token, but until she has 3, nothing happens. Okay, so for our second turn, our plan is to use the Cat Eye Circlet to see which hit locations the monster has on top, try and do some wounds, and then maybe use our bandages to take the 2 bleeding tokens off of Samantha. Because she's not our main tank, it's probably not as important to keep her from accumulating bleed tokens, but it might be good just to be safe. So, starting with the Cat Eye Circlet, the hit locations on top are Armoured Pig Shoulder, a super dense location which we need to avoid hitting with our axe because it will break. A location that has high rewards and high risks, with a failure causing a basic action targeting us, but a wound knocking the butcher down. And Furious Gauntlet, which will cause some brain damage. So we decided to put the super dense location on the bottom of the 3 cards and then hit with our axe, since that avoids us risking Frail breaking the axe. And then we placed Furious Gut on top, hoping that we might be able to knock the monster down. I moved a bit further away with Kayade and then moved in with Emir to bandage Samantha, since we were worried that she might take bleeding tokens from any reactions. Samantha moved around the back of the butcher to get into his blind spot and rolled 1 hit with the axe. She rolled a wound, knocking the monster over, and all survivors gained +1 courage. Now that the monster's knocked over, we hit him on a 3+ and all of his reactions are cancelled. Next, Susie is going to try and hit, and because the monster's knocked down, she can hit on a 3+ with both of her attacks using her Katar. 2 hits, pulling both of the other cards we saw before. Neither of these have any effect on us because the Katar is not frail, and reactions are cancelled because the monster's fallen over. We failed to wound the gauntlet, but a 5 plus our 3 weapon damage and 1 strength means that we wounded the Armoured Pig Shoulder. We wanted to make the most of the monster being knocked down, so Kayade survivaled in order to be able to use her Cat Eye Circlet again, and we pulled 3 safe locations for us to hit. Because he's knocked over and his reflexes are cancelled, none of these hit locations matter, and since he's going to shuffle his deck at the start of his turn anyway, it doesn't matter which order we place them in. But by using the Cat Eye Circlet, we were able to make sure we didn't run into a trap when he was knocked down, causing him to stand up again. Samantha surged for free using her Rawhide Armor bonus, and rolled 2 more hits, but unfortunately neither of them were wounds. Susie also surged using her final survival, and drew the last hit location that we saw with the circlet, and this time we managed to score 1 more wound. Although we didn't get much value for our survival, at least we managed to cause a couple of wounds. Now it's the monster's turn again, and Emir becomes the monster controller. We shuffle the monster's hit location deck, and he stands up because it's the start of his turn. He's still facing towards Susie at the moment. The first card he drew was another Wild Carve, which will target Susie. He missed one of his attacks and hit 1, causing 1 foot damage and a bleed token. Samantha and Susie also suffered 1 additional damage to the waist and the head respectively, and each take another bleed token. What's going on with this bleeding token? Big blood. For his second move, Screaming comes into play. When Screaming comes into play, all non-deaf survivors suffer 1 brain damage per monster level, causing each survivor to take a lunacy token. And from now on, at the start of the butcher's turn, they'll suffer another brain damage until a survivor dies. Typically, you'd want to bring the Whisker Harp to this fight so that you can get rid of these moods, but unfortunately, the only golden whiskers that dropped in this campaign were from the very first line we fought, and we needed them to make other items. So we're unfortunately going to have to just deal with Screaming, and hope that we can spend all of our survival before Infectious Lunacy kicks in. Our turn again, and we decided to start by bandaging Susie with Emir and then running away, and then using Kayade's Cat Eye Circlet to see the top 3 cards of the hit locations deck. We draw the Furious Crown, Furious Scrag, and Furious Shoulder. Unfortunately, we've already used every single one of our founding stones in spite of getting some extra ones in this campaign, so we can't try and crit the Furious Scrag. Nonetheless, we're going to put that on top and then have Furious Shoulder next so that if survivors get bashed, they're also knocked back and out of range of any AoE attacks that the monster might do. Samantha hit from the blind spot with her axe, causing 2 hits thanks to being in the blind spot. She wounded the Furious Scrag and the Furious Shoulder, rolling a 5, just about enough. Because Furious Shoulder is a reflex and happens even on a wound, both Samantha and Susie get knocked back and knocked down. Since we need to use our survival before we hit Infectious Lunacy, we decided to use Emir to get up Samantha again, using Encourage, allowing her to walk up and surge for another set of attacks. Unfortunately, we didn't get that for free using Rawhide. We got 1 more hit, which we wounded, but the reflex knocked her over once again. Finally, the reflex causes the monster to full move towards the furthest survivor away. We used Kayade's final survival in order to encourage up Susie, making her the closest threat in facing. This also meant that Susie could use her Rawhide Headband to manipulate the monster's AI cards, and since she's going to be the monster controller on his turn, she might also get some insanity. Both the attacks were fairly similar, so we decided to just put them back in the same order. And now it's the monster's turn. At the start of his turn, all non-deaf survivors suffer 1 brain damage, giving Kaede and Emir their 2nd infectious lunacy tokens, and Samantha her 3rd. Samantha's 3rd infectious lunacy token means that she suffers the Frenzy brain trauma. The way Frenzy works is that you gain 1d5 insanity, a speed and strength token, and ignore slow on melee weapons, but it stops you from spending survival or using fighting arts, or weapon specialization or mastery. She gains 2 insanity and a strength and speed token. Unfortunately, Susie took 1 too many brain damage and will need to take a brain trauma. She rolled a 2, which would have killed her, so we re-rolled using her lifetime reroll. And she rolled a 1. Unfortunately, this means that Dreaded Trophies is now in effect, giving an extra bleed 1 to all of the Butcher's attacks, but on the bright side, Screaming is now discarded. Now onto the monster's actual turn, and he starts with Phew. Phew targets the closest threat facing, which is Emir at the moment. Unfortunately, because Susie was meant to be the tank soaking these attacks, it'll now be Emir or Kaede that take them, and he scores a hit. Emir spends his final survival to avoid the 3 damage to the body and hands, as well as the 2 bleeding tokens and the bash that occur after damage. Next, the Butcher drew Wild Carve and hit with both attacks, so Emir takes 1 damage to the body and arms again, as well as 2 bleeding tokens after damage, 1 from the attack profile and 1 from Dreaded Trophies, as well as an additional 3rd bleeding token from the final flow on the card, and a final damage to the foot. Okay, so it's our turn and things are looking decidedly terrible compared to last turn, but we've decided that since Samantha isn't enraged to attack, we'll start by using her Rawhide Headband and try and position around what the monster's next card is. We drew Hack and Hack City, so we decided to put Hack City on top and try as best we can to get rid of it by wounding him. Samantha moved closer to the monster, and then Kaede moved equidistant from Samantha and used Cat Eye Circlet so that we could see what Emir will be hitting with his dart. Looking at the 3 hit locations, we would normally have chosen Furious Gut to try and knock the Butcher down, but since we won't be able to capitalize on him being knocked over, there's no real reason to at this point, other than the +1 courage. Furious Vambraces would be certain death for Emir, so we decided to put Furious Gauntlet on top in the hope that he might be able to trigger Infectious Lunacy and give us some extra strength to use with his darts. Now that that's done, Emir can move down further away than Samantha and throw a dart. He scored a hit and a wound, using the +3 strength from the dart and his +1 strength from Survival of the Fittest. That means that we got rid of Hack City, and the monster is now down to only 4 cards in his AI deck. Now it's the monster's turn again, and thankfully now that Screaming is gone, he just goes straight to drawing AI cards. We knew the first card he would draw would be Hack because we used Rawhide Headband last turn, and because there's no one facing him, the closest threat is now equal between Samantha and Kaede. And although Kaede would gain 1 insanity from being targeted, she would also probably die, so we decided to target Samantha. The Butcher hit both of his 2 attacks, dealing 1 damage to the head and 1 damage to the foot, and 2 bleeding tokens thanks to Dreaded Trophies. Next he pulled Wild Carve, a speed 2 accuracy 4+ attack that will definitely kill Samantha if it hits because she has 3 bleeding tokens. Unfortunately, the Butcher just barely scored 2 hits, meaning that we couldn't lifetime reroll them to survive, meaning that no matter which hit locations we rolled, Samantha would still die from 2 bleeding tokens and a 3rd from the final flow on the card. A 2nd survivor on Dreaded Trophies means that he now also has an extra movement and a speed token. I bet you're wondering how we turned this around into a victory. Just kidding, we died horribly. Because we were defeated, the Butcher rampages through the settlement and everyone escapes into the darkness until it leaves. All resources in the settlement's storage are lost repairing the destruction. But the joke's on him because we didn't have any resources anyway. All in all, I think this was a fairly typical fight against the Butcher, and I'm relatively happy with how we played it, even though it didn't turn out well at all. Although Susie's death was quite unlucky to that 1 brain damage, it definitely was preventable if we had given her a bit more insanity through manipulating the monster controller or something else. We had some really bad luck going into this fight because on Lantern Year 2 of this campaign, we accidentally ran into a level 2 White Lion on a hunt event, and although we almost beat it, we died and ended up quite behind on resources. Even just having the Whisker Harp could have helped a lot with getting rid of Screaming, and having more Monster Grease would have helped with evasion as well. I'm sure a more experienced player can see a lot of things we could improve in our game, but even when fights go terribly, it's important to remember that it doesn't necessarily mean the strategy wasn't correct. Sometimes you just got unlucky. Luckily, losing is all part of the Kingdom Death experience. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and since this Butcher well and truly ended this campaign, I think it's time that I started a new one. Once I do, I'll make videos about the non-prologue White Lion and the Screaming Antelope, and hopefully we'll get a bit further in that campaign than we did in this one. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.